Hi, this is Lili Anderson, and you're listening to Choosing Glory. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of sections 81 through 83. Just want to say a couple more things about these sections and then give a couple of current events. One very, very happy one, or at least very positive. But the first one I want to mention is from these sections is one more verse in section 82. I mean, there is some nice talk about Zion, and there are some other things about covenant and so on, and I'm not going to talk about them. Seeking the interest of his neighbor. I like that phrase. That's verse 19. But let's go to verse 18. And let me tell you, I've mentioned this story before, and for some reason I couldn't have told you it was section 82, and I don't think I looked it up that time. But I mentioned the story of when, at a very busy time in our lives as a family, and in my life, I was already teaching early morning seminary. We were building a new house. I might have been finishing up my master's degree. And if I was already done with the 2-year program, I was in the busy years of acquiring supervised hours of counseling where it's kind of an apprenticeship before you can be fully licensed on your own. So that was busy because you need, thousands of hours. And something had gone wrong with the building of our house because the first guy we were working with turned out to have a gambling problem. And anyway, it was a disaster that we had to deal with. So, I mean, a lot of things were happening. And I was, as I said, still teaching seminary, and I was teaching adult religion in the first stake that we had been in. Well, anyway, it was the South stake in Las Vegas. I guess the second stake we were in. And I loved teaching, but it was busy. And the adult religion class, of course, seminary was every day of the weekday. And then the adult religion class was one morning. And we met for 2 hours, but to get there and set up and, talk to people afterwards and whatever, it was basically a whole morning. And then in the midst of this, I was approached by another stake president, not our own stake president where we were moving to in the Lone Mountain area, but a neighboring stake president who knew Chris quite well from Family Service Association with his stake and so on. It was Scott Higginson. Great guy. I love his wife, Cindy. Still, she's a marvelous person and a great friend. I was asked by Scott if I would teach adult religion in his stake. And this is always a great honor to be asked to do something like that, but I hesitated because of how busy I was. And as I said, I think I've told this story before, so forgive the repetition, but I did ask President Higginson to give me a few days to pray about it, which I immediately began to do and told Chris about it, and we prayed together. But honestly, I couldn't come up with a secure answer because I'm not one that I didn't second guess. I loved opportunities to teach, so there was an inclination to say yes, just because it was so wonderful to be able to have those opportunities. But I was trying to be careful about running faster than I had strength, and our family was still very much, in a busy stage with kids going every which way, and I think we might have still had our first missionary out and our second one, getting ready to go to BYU soon, and it was just busy, and every time I took on something, that took me away from things that I could do for the family, of course. So I kept going back and forth, and finally I went to Chris and I said, "I need you to get this answer for me. Will you do that? Like, I pray, but I'm not confident that I'm getting a clear answer, and I need you to do that." And I'm just so grateful that I could trust Chris in that way. I knew that he would seek inspiration and not pursue his own benefit, because it would have been easy for him to say, "Don't do it. It's too much, and, everybody in the family will have less of you." And it would be another morning per week. The early mornings were already gone, and then, one already taken for adult religion, and it would have taken a second one, and I wouldn't be giving anything up because I still had to do those internship hours. Not internship, I forget the name of it, but anyway, it's during the licensure hours. So Chris started praying about it and came back within a few days. And this was not what the family was reading. The family was reading the Book of Mormon at that time, but Chris, in his personal study, was doing some rereading of the D&C. And he came to section 82, verse 18, and felt that this was the answer that he had been praying for on my behalf. And of course, this is what it says. All this for the benefit of the church of the living God, that every man may improve upon his talent, that every man may gain other talents, yea, even an hundredfold, to be cast into the Lord's storehouse. That was the phrase that he particularly felt inspired by, and felt inspired was the answer for me. To be cast into the Lord's storehouse, to become the common property of the whole church. And when he was explaining this to me, he said, I feel like the Lord has given you these talents, and he wants you to cast them into this storehouse. So I think you need to teach that class. And so many blessings came from teaching that class, not just for me, but for our family as well. Just marvelous relationships that came from there, marvelous experiences, and really some things that blessed our whole family. I'm grateful to this day for a husband that I could trust, who was not seeking his own interest, because as usual, every time more was asked of me by the Lord, Chris picked up the slack. Now, my wonderful children also stepped up in so many ways as I was asked by the Lord to do, much more than I ever would have volunteered to do. And a constant prayer for me was, do not let this cost my children. And I didn't want it to cost Chris either, but of course it did. Of course, they all contributed to those activities that I was being engaged in by revelation to take on. And I don't know if there's any way that we know exactly what the Lord is doing when we're in the midst of it. I certainly didn't see as much as now, looking back, I can recognize. I was grateful, and I did try to express that all the time to my children, and especially to Chris. But now I look back and I think I wish I had expressed even more gratitude, because it was truly a miracle that I received this kind of support, and it allowed me to have these experiences and to try to give of my widow's mite. Well, now it's definitely and literally a widow's mite, but back then it was, whatever mite it was. My small contributions to the kingdom were made possible because of my family. And of course, all glory to God for those opportunities and for the talents and abilities that he gave me and allowed me to develop. I always want to give credit to my wonderful parents, and absolutely a ton of credit goes to my husband, who, again, when you're living with it, it's hard to recognize how unique it is and how amazing Chris's contributions were. Again, I express gratitude. I feel even more gratitude now looking back, and I hope that Chris knows how grateful I am. I trust that he does. But the scriptures really can be applied personally to us at times of need. I know that many of you have had those experiences where the scriptures have, even scriptures that we've read many times before, but in moments of need, speak to us more clearly than ever before and apply to our various concerns and our searchings for guidance. Now, I want to say a couple of things about unity, because, I got Zion on the brain, And we need to be one heart and one mind with no poor. Oh, dwelling in righteousness. Sometimes I skip that, and people have reminded me about that. I'm appreciative of that reminder. Such an important part of it. One heart, one mind, dwelling in righteousness, and no poor. Those are the descriptions given to us in Moses of Zion. And it's a great definition, fairly comprehensive. So unity is a big part of Zion. Now, I remember reading over the years statements occasionally from leaders talking about how do we get that unity, and why do other people, sometimes outside the church, comment on the fact that we're a fairly unified church. Like, again, if you haven't had a lot of exposure to other religions, it's easy for us to maybe not recognize how truly unique we are, that we can travel to Timbuktu or any other part of the world and go to a sacrament meeting, and we're singing the same hymns, and we're reading from the same scriptures, and we're teaching the same doctrine. Now, I know we're imperfect and we get variations, and sometimes we're closer to hitting the mark than other places, but basically, we are pretty unified in so many noticeable ways. That is not true of so many other religions, where you can just go across the street to another Baptist church or Methodist church or Lutheran church, and you're going to hear, a lot of different things. And of course, that's true of every other religion that doesn't have that same consistency. So it is a huge blessing that we have a measure of unity already, but there is much more to be done to be Zion ready. And some of the comments that I've read over the years really talk about that what helps to unify us is that we follow the prophet. Now, here we have Joseph Smith, who has people leaving right and left and criticizing him, turning against him, even people who've shared amazing experiences with him. So here they are trying to establish Zion. It's not going to happen in Joseph's day, but it's certainly the goal of every prophet in every dispensation. And he understands the principles. So, they're trying to invite people to do that. Today, we are being invited by our prophet to become the people who will receive the Lord in his second coming. That means we're going to have to build Zion. We're going to have to be of one heart and one mind, dwell in righteousness, and have no poor. And it takes following the prophet. This was President Jeffrey R. Holland. In such basic matters of faith, prophets do not apologize for requesting unity. Indeed, conformity, in the eloquent sense that the prophet Joseph Smith used that latter word. In other words, it doesn't mean that we're going to be robotic or automatons or not exercise, our unique talents and so on. But yes, conformity to the gospel norm, which is not the statistical norm, but it's the cultural norm of the gospel. What God has said is right. And again, the scriptures talk about conforming to the image of Christ. So yes, in the right use of that word, in a gospel sense, there is not just unity required, but yes, conformity to what our God has revealed. And then he quotes Elder Neil Maxwell. So he says, as Elder Neil Maxwell once said to me in a hallway conversation, there didn't seem to be any problem with conformity the day the Red Sea opened. So sort of in the manner of there are no atheists in foxholes. When there is an emergency, people are willing to follow the prophet. But boy, when we're not in an emergency, we think we're entitled to our personal authority, and we can complain all we want. Marion G. Romney has spoken on this subject in the past. He was, of course, a member of the first presidency back a long time ago, brilliant doctrinal scholar. President Romney also taught all who are out of harmony in any degree with the presidency have need to repent and to seek the Lord for forgiveness and to put themselves in full harmony. Now, this next part is from a website by a guy who calls himself Go Go Goff. And, I've never seen it before, but when I mentioned it to one of my kids, they were familiar with it. So I think he's pretty straight. I liked what he was writing, and I'm going to read some of it. The only thing that will produce the unity we are commanded to have by Christ is to follow the prophet. And he actually discussed earlier in this particular article or blog post that just saying we're followers of the Bible or the scriptures isn't enough, because look at all the people who say they're following the Bible, but they're all over the place with different interpretation and so on. So that's not enough to create unity. And even he said, even believing in Joseph Smith is not enough, because again, we've got different interpretations of what the prophet Joseph said, or how inspired he was in the things that he did. And there's a lot of controversy about that. This is his conclusion. The only thing that will produce the unity we're commanded to have by Christ is to follow the prophet. Now, I want to be clear, we do not worship the prophet, nor is he the head of the church. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. But the living prophet, I think he puts this really well. I like it. The living prophet is Jesus Christ's authorized representative. He has the authority and obligation to lead and guide the church on earth in accordance with Christ's direction. And in turn, we have been given the assurance by Christ that he will not allow the prophet to lead us astray. This promise, he puts parenthetically, has been given both in Scripture as well as over the pulpit dozens and dozens of times. And he even gives a link to 25 plus times we have been promised that the prophet will not lead us astray. And then he says at the end here, now you might be thinking, but the prophet is fallible. Yes, we don't believe in the infallibility of the prophet, like the Catholics believe in the infallibility of the Pope. Well, they say that, but, it has often been said that nobody in the Catholic Church really believes that. But they do say that as part of their supposed, doctrinal stance. And we don't say that. We know that these are men. We know that God uses a lay clergy, at every level, and that we are fallible as even in leadership positions in the church. But that doesn't take away from the fact that he is the prophet of the church, the living prophet, is Christ's mortal captain. Another nice phrase. Jesus Christ authorized representative. That's a great description. And then here again, Christ's mortal captain. I really liked that. And I think that, again, looking at what's going on here in Joseph Smith's day is no different than what has happened in every day, where we've got people who are criticizing the prophets right and left, living and dead. And if we are going to be unified, we need to get over ourselves. We really need to get over our squabbles. No, we don't believe that there's infallibility, but we do need to be in harmony with the teachings and the directions of the living prophet. And yes, is that a sacrifice and a challenge? And does it require faith? Absolutely. And we can pray for confirmations, as we should, and we're instructed to do that. But brothers and sisters, that is the way. And that is the only way we're going to be able to become Zion ready and create Zion when we are called to do so, and hopefully be in that call and participate in that incredible work, which hopefully is around the corner. Elder Maxwell, one more statement on this same subject from a speech called Meeting the Challenges of Today, given at BYU in October of 1978, so a long time ago. Make no mistake about it, brothers and sisters, in the months and years ahead, events are likely to require each member to decide whether or not he will follow the first presidency. Well, again, I think we're in that day. I think we see it. All right, now to a little bit of current event stuff. This one was brutal. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on describing what OnlyFans is. Some of you will have heard of that. Please don't, engage in anything crazy like that, because it is pornography, but it's basically DIY, do-it-yourself pornography. So a lot of now women are on there who offer to meet the lewd and lascivious requests of subscribers with photos or video, show all this horrible pornographic stuff that they are personally producing. And some of these girls make millions of dollars. Like, it's horrible. Now, this was the added horrible part that I just heard a couple of days ago on a report. It wasn't even all about this, but it was kind of like in passing, just talking about some of the things that are happening with our younger generations in this country. So here was the data that, honestly, it did give me pause. And it's hard for me to be shocked by anything, but this was kind of sobering. Approximately 1.4 million American women are on OnlyFans. 1.4 million American women. But here's the even more sobering part. Of that number, 1.2 million, so almost all of them, like There are 1.4 participating. 1.2 million, almost the whole group, are between the ages of 18 and 24. How tragic is this? This is roughly 10% of the total number of American women in that age bracket. So basically, if you're a woman or you know a woman who is between the ages of 18 and 24, 1 in 10 of those women in that age bracket in the United States are on OnlyFans offering these lewd acts for money. I mean, this is a real tragedy. Now, I saw this going back, anyway, it's a long story about how I found this speech. I don't think I even read the whole speech, but I read a lot of it. It was a BYU address given by Pat and President Jeffrey Holland when he was president of the university back in February 1982, called The Inconvenient Messiah. And I thought this was a relevant quote. There is too much sexual transgression on this campus. He's talking to BYU students back in 1982. There is too much sexual transgression on this campus. Any is too much. And we have much too much. This highest of all physical gratifications you were designed and created to enjoy. It is as natural as it is appealing. Yes, sex is a gift that God has given us that is an incredible physical experience. And it is designed not just to create children, but to create bonds between married men and women and to help that relationship become even closer. And it's a great gift, but this is where Satan enters, right? He takes, again, he's always going for the gold. And the counterfeits that are out there are so tragic and often incredibly successful. And we have so many people now who are, again, being in our highly sexualized world. We end up with stats like that, where 10% of the women in America aged 18 to 24 are selling sex. Anyway, to continue with President Holland's inspired remarks, it is as natural as it is appealing. It is given of God to make us like God, because yes, procreation is a godlike power. And Satan has certainly capitalized on a divinely ordained appeal. But it is not yours without price. Not instantly, not conveniently, not with cozy corruption is a great phrase. Cozy corruption of eternal powers. Let me just say that again. Not with cozy corruption of eternal powers. That's not how it works. It is to be earned. That access to that experience is to be earned over time and with discipline. It, like every good thing, is God's right to bestow, not Satan's. When faced with that inherent appetite, a disciple of Christ must be willing to say, yes, but not this way. In time, with love, after marriage. Now, I used to tell my BYU students and others, but every semester at BYU, I brought this up. There are 2 prerequisites for sex. The first is marriage. In this order, the first is marriage, hopefully in the temple. Second, love, kindness, respect. Both of them should be present. And just because you're married, that doesn't give you complete license either. You still have to love your partner, and they need to feel that love. So, and not conveniently, like the day or the week or the month that you desire intimacy. It's about, a consistent effort to build the bonds of that relationship in a healthy way so that there is safety, complete trust, love. Anyway, God has set the requirements, and it is His place to set those requirements and those parameters, not Satan's. And not the sophistry of the world, but really is just Satan's stuff kind of dressed up, for supposedly public consumption. Okay, the right and proper and sanctified physical relationship of a man and woman is as much a part, indeed more a part, of God's plan for us as is the eating of our daily bread. But there is no convenient Messiah. Salvation comes only through discipline and sacrifice. In our time, the only restraint left, because society has removed all the restraints, and again, he's saying this in 82. In our time, the only restraint left is self-restraint. If you're looking for somebody else to put the brakes on sexual behavior, forget it. The world, your friends, your companions, the media, no, there's no restraint out there. Even members of the church take this very lightly, and that's what he's saying. He's talking to BYU students and saying there's way too much problem behavior when it comes to sexuality on campus, and this was back in 82. Again, let's just get a grip of ourselves. So the only restraint left is self-restraint. I ask you to say of this highest, most intimate, most sacred physical expression, yes, but not this way. And I would add, not in this time, like saving this sacred activity for the time and the context that has been designated by God, not by Satan or by the world. I ask you to be inconvenienced until you've earned the right and paid the divine price to know the body and the soul of the one you love. This is beautifully put. This is like a precursor to what he spoke about in that wonderful speech of souls, symbols, and sacraments. Always worth a review if it's been a while. Excuse me for speaking boldly, but this must be said. I think that's just stunningly beautiful. Okay, my last bit of news is happy news, and it is just a celebration again of first responders and good men. I don't mean to leave out good women. And I hope I don't. As David Popenoe wrote, and I've quoted this many times, mothers give their children roots and fathers give them wings. The design is a divine division of labor where we collaborate, men and women, and we produce the blessings that God desires to give us together. And there is synergy that is added. Our world has turned men and women so adversarial, so at each other's throats sometimes, as if one wins, the other one loses. But that is not the case. If one loses, then everybody loses. Men, women, and children lose if we are adversaries because of our sexual differences. Good heavens, like the adversary has really taken over in so many of these arenas. And feminism has done incredible damage. I saw an article years ago now. I don't remember where it was even, but it was showing basically the emasculation of men over time since the rise of the feminist movement. I think it was showing like GQ covers and other, magazine covers with top-notch male models. And they weren't, pornographic or anything. These were just like they were advertising stuff. But they were male models, and, they started out looking like pretty masculine. They were real men. And then it would do these kind of interval jumps of, some few years and show how those male models were more feminized. And they become more androgynous, less manly, and more metrosexual. And it was really a well done depiction of how this has changed over time, but it happens so gradually and subtly that I don't think I ever would have said before seeing that article, like, oh, have you noticed how, Madison Avenue is changing the way they depict men? But, they are, and they have. And, it just does such undermining to good men. And of course, a lot of masculine traits now are so attacked and demonized. And of course, it's all rendered as toxic in our vocabulary these days, which is so evil. I'm not saying that, men don't need to behave. Of course they do. But good men are being demonized for manliness. And this is the nightmare. It's a nightmare. And I hope we don't give up on teaching both our sons and our daughters to appreciate femininity and masculinity. And yes, recognizing that we can work together and there is synergy to come if we will appreciate and value the differences and the ability to collaborate. So anyway, I'm trying to shout out to men anytime I can because I do feel like you get hammered. Again, I'm not saying women are attacked by Satan too. He is attacking motherhood, especially womanhood. He's attacking everybody. Nobody is going to be free of Satan's attention in these last of the last days. But I don't know. Just want to, as a woman, express my gratitude to good men. And I'm going to make a shout out today to one of the Coast Guard rescue swimmers that helped with the Texas floods. I think I have his name here somewhere. Petty Officer Scott Ruskin. It was his first mission, and he was flown in by helicopter from a base, a Coast Guard base that was 1 hour away from where the floods were so intense. But because the weather was so bad due to the storm and so on, and the storm conditions that continued, in an interview, he said it took, instead of the 1 hour that it would have normally taken with good weather, it took like 6 to 7 hours for them to get to their destination, which dropped him on the camp. I think it was called Camp Mystic. It was a Christian girls' camp where there were like 200 leaders and girls that were trapped. And he rescued 100, and the numbers varied a little bit in the reports, but about 165 or possibly 169. I'm not sure what the final count was, but a huge number were rescued. And, they bring down these baskets, and of course, he had to calm a lot of the panic and so on, which was understandable under those circumstances. And just the appearance of a man in those emergency situations has been shown to help bring calm and reduce panic because, again, men can do things that women can't do. And one of them is to be a Coast Guard rescue swimmer. Their official name, I always forget, is Aviation Survival Technicians. That's the official designation, but we call them Coast Guard rescue swimmers a lot. It's also an appropriate title. I don't know if you've seen the 2006 movie called The Guardian with Kevin Costner and Ashton Kutcher. It's a tender movie. Some sad stuff in there. I don't always like sad movies, but this one really touched me and I liked it. Watched it with Chris many years ago and then watched it again because it did touch me. And it taught me about things that I had no idea about this profession of Coast Guard rescue swimmers. There are only 350 of them in the entire nation. And they do rescues. It's kind of a combination Navy SEAL dolphin, They have to know how to handle themselves underwater in horrible storm conditions, often icy waters, where no other rescue approach is possible. And they are, like I said, lowered from helicopters into these really crazy conditions. And then they put people in rescue baskets and they're hauled up into the helicopter. And anyway, it's harrowing and incredibly dangerous work. I think I read somewhere that they make around $35,000 a year, which, there are so many good people in our world who do amazing work that are underpaid. And this would be another one. So, I mean, it's like a 24-week training, and the attrition rate, meaning people who drop out of the training after starting and qualifying for the training, is similar to that of Navy SEALs. So reports varied, but, from 50 to like 85% might drop out of a particular training cycle. Navy SEALs, I think, say that it's about a 65% attrition rate. And of course, they don't just have to be physically capable in amazing ways, but they also have to be mentally tough and emotionally resilient because they're dealing with emergencies all the time. So I just wanted to give a shout out to this guy. It was his first mission, and he, in this interview, was so unassuming and modest and gave credit to everybody else, to the girls, to their leaders, to his teammates, to all those who were first responders in the area. And it was a really beautiful demonstration of manliness. And I am grateful. And it's ironic that it's coming on the heels of that article that I mentioned. Or maybe I didn't mention this one yet, but there was a New York Times article that was kind of following up on that $20 million project by the Democratic Party trying to find out how to reach out to men. As I said before, I could have told them for free or, give me $50. And I'll tell you, you're not going to really resonate with good men unless you completely reverse policies and stated policies that they're not about to change because they've been advocating it for so long. The militant feminism, the demonization of men, the toxic masculinity idea that has been promoted so fervently on the left side of the aisle, that the transgender guys who are in girls' sports and locker rooms and private spaces, the idea that men can get pregnant, or that, you can't define male or female because it's a moving target and it's whatever you feel and do. And I mean, all these things are calculated to undermine men and women. And yeah, it's costing them stuff. And what a surprise. And it made me think about ways that we can encourage our boys to be men that have been often lost now in our society. Remember how it used to be sort of stereotypical that when a guy liked a girl in school, he would carry her books? Now, was that because she couldn't carry her own books? No. I mean, of course she carries her own books when she has to, but a lot of the things that used to traditionally be taught to men about, like, walking on the outside of the sidewalk, carrying books, carrying heavy packages, pumping the gas, you know, taking off a jacket and putting it on the shoulders of a cold woman or girl, those things, it's tipping a hat, opening a door. Those are not because women can't do those things. And women do those things all the time when a man's not around or available. Of course, it's not like we're helpless. The beauty of it is that it's shorthand. It's shorthand for, while I'm here, I will make sure you're safe. While I'm here, if there's danger, they'll have to get through me to get to you. That is such an important message, but it has been undermined again and again by our society. But I hope we're still teaching our boys and appreciating our men for doing those manly things. And I mean, it's so easy sometimes to dismiss it. Oh, I don't need your help, or I can do it. And I'm not saying that we need to be helpless or, fainting, women who act like they can't do anything themselves. That's not at all what I'm advocating. I'm just saying when a man tries to do those kind things, can we just appreciate that it's not the act itself? And it's certainly not the insult that many feminists have turned it into. Like, don't open my door for me. And I used to tell my boys this story that I read so many years ago on like the Reader's Digest or something. It was an older gentleman who was visiting a college campus and opened a door for a young co-ed. And this feminista type girl comes through the door and says, "You don't have to hold the door for me because I'm a woman." And this, brilliant response was on the part of the man was, "I'm not holding it because you're a woman. I'm holding it because I'm a gentleman." And I told my boys that. I said, now you're equipped. If some girl gives you grief over doing something kind for her, that's your answer. I'm not going to fight with you. You can be who you want to be, but I'm going to be who I'm going to be, which is a gentleman. I'm going to be the kind of man that gives those symbols to you. If I open a door, if I'm carrying a package, if I'm pumping your gas, whatever it is. And we really did try to teach our boys this. And I was with Harper for lunch last Friday, and I was thinking about this. So I would mention the Times article to him and, just how crazy it is that these questions, are coming up. Gee, how do we stop alienating men? I'm like, yeah, well, maybe we should appreciate them and not make everything they do sound so demonized and toxic. But anyway, I remembered something that I wanted to thank Harper again. And the nice thing is he didn't even remember it because it was a part of who he was by then. And he was probably only like 12 or 13. We were walking with, the second half of the family, I think, here in Utah to the conference center. I don't remember what the event was, but we were in Sunday clothes and it was a little brisk. And I was walking, the sidewalk wasn't wide enough for our family to be across the sidewalk, but I was behind Harper and I think it was Faith, who is 2 kids ahead of Harper. So she was older than he was by probably 3 or 4 years, I think. And what was so sweet, it was one of those, reward moments for parents because I didn't say anything to him and Faith didn't say anything to him, but he noticed that she was in a short sleeve dress and it was a little brisk and he took off his Sunday jacket and he put it around her shoulders. And I was just like, oh my gosh, he gets it. And he did it unprompted. as a young boy. And then when I was mentioning it to him over our lunch the other day, he said, "Oh, I don't remember that." And that was even better because I'm like, oh my gosh, it was natural to him. He doesn't see that as a big deal. And then what was nice too is he mentioned, he goes, "Oh, I don't know if I ever told you this." He goes, "But," he says, "sometimes I'm more bold than other times about talking." And he's an extrovert, but it's, sometimes it's not appropriate to get in people's business. But he said, "I do remember a time when I was coming out of some, place where there were prom goers." And he was out of high school by then and an adult, but he said there were a lot of couples that obviously were doing their prom night and dressed that way. And he said he held the door for a couple that was coming out of this establishment behind him, and it was chilly. And the girl was in like a spaghetti strap dress or whatever. Not maybe the most modest choice, but anyway, she's coming out dressed like that. And the young man was dressed again in formal wear, but it was chilly. And Harper said it was just convenient at that point. I was close enough to him to say this without, trying to sound critical. I wasn't saying it for her to hear, but I just kind of said to him as kindly as I could, "Hey man, take off your jacket and I'll take care of her." And the young man was, responded well, but Harper was just like saying, "I didn't mean it to be critical or anything, but I just am aware that so many young men don't get taught those things anymore." And it was kind of like brother to brother. I just want to pass this on. Here's a moment where you can do this thing because you're a man and she's a woman. Anyway, I hope we are not only teaching that, I hope we appreciate it and that we appreciate all the men in our lives and we help them feel appreciated for being men. It's against the current these days. Couple of quotes I liked. This is Walter Schirra Sr. I don't know who that is. "You don't raise heroes, you raise sons. And if you treat them like sons, they'll turn out to be heroes." Anyway, I like that. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, a more familiar name, "A hero is no braver than an ordinary man, but he is braver 5 minutes longer." I like it too. We can become men and women of Christ, men and women of God. We can be Zion ready. We can choose glory now and make it celestial glory, and thereby seek sanctification and bring Zion, which will help to usher in the coming of our Savior and Redeemer Jesus Christ in glory. Let's do it. Thanks, as ever, to the best man in my life, Chris Anderson, and another good man, Doug Larson of Point Digital. Take care.